Well, folks, this is going to be the first installment of the Pipe Poetry channel, and I am currently loading up my Savinelli Duca Carlo bent brandy or bent billiard. It's probably more of a billiard, with some a luxury navy flake that I have already crushed, and I'm going to put it in and light it up. I'm going to be reading out of Pipe and Pouch, the Smoker's Own Book of Poetry. This is a first edition. Printed in 1894. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read this in a series of videos from cover to cover, each time with a pipe. We'll begin with the preface. This is an age of anthologies. Collections of poetry covering a wide range of subjects have appeared of late and seem to have met with favor and approval. Not to the busy man only, but to the student of literature, such compilations are of value. It is sometimes objected that they tend to discourage wide reading and original research, but the overwhelming flood of books would seem to make them a necessity. Unless one has the rare gift of being able to sprint through a book, as Andrew Lang says Mr. Gladstone does, it is surely well to make use of the labors of the industrious compiler. Such collections are often the result of wide reading and patient labor. Frequently, the larger part is made up of single poems, the happy and perhaps only inspiration of the writer, gleaned from the poet's corner. From the poet's corner of the newspaper or the pages of a magazine. This is especially true of the present compilation, the first on the subject aiming at anything like completeness. Brief collections of prose and poetry combined have already been published, but so much of value has been omitted that there seemed to be room for a better book. A vast amount has been written in praise of tobacco, much of it commonplace or lacking in poetic quality. While some of the verse here gathered is an obvious echo or passes into unmistakable parody, it has been the aim of the compiler to maintain, as far as possible, a high standard and include only the best. From the days of Raleigh to the present time, literature abounds in allusions to tobacco. The Elizabethan writers constantly refer to it, often in praise, though sometimes in condemnation. The incoming of the Indian weed created a great furor, and scarcely any other of the New World discoveries was talked about so much. Ben Jonson, Marlowe, Fletcher, Spenser, Dekker, and many other of the poets and dramatists of the time make frequent reference to it, and no doubt at the Mermaid Tavern pipes and tobacco found a place beside the sack and ale. Singular to say, Shakespeare makes no reference to it, and only once in his essay Of Plantations, as far as the compiler has been able to discover, does Bacon speak of it. Shakespeare's silence has been explained on the theory that he could not introduce any reference to the newly discovered plant without anachronism, and he did not often let a little thing of this kind stand in his way. It has been suggested, on the other hand, that he avoided all reference to it out of deference to King James I, who wrote the famous Counterblast. Whichever theory is correct, the fact remains, and it may be an interesting contribution to the Bacon-Shakespeare controversy. Queen Elizabeth never showed any hostility to tobacco, but her successors, James I and the two Charleses and Cromwell were its bitter opponents. Notwithstanding its enemies, who just as fiercely opposed the introduction of tea and coffee, its use spread over Europe and the world, and prince and peasant alike yielded to its mild but irresistible sway. At this point, let me put the in here, I need to relight. I'm enjoying the background to this already. It seems that literature on tobacco is finding some home, and that is being taken very seriously. And that's actually kind of a fun thing. Sorry about the airplanes too. Poets and philosophers drew solace and inspiration from the pipe. Milton, Addison, Fielding, Hobbes, and Newton were all smokers. It is said that Newton was smoking under a tree in his garden when the historic apple fell. Scott, Campbell, Byron, Hood, and Lamb all smoked, and Carlyle and Tennyson were rarely without a pipe in their mouths. The great novelists, Thackeray, Dickens, and Bulwer, were famous smokers, and so were the great soldiers, Napoleon, Blücher, and Grant. While nearly all the poems here gathered together were written and perhaps could only have been written by smokers, several among the best are the work of authors who never used the weed, and one by a man, 2 or 3 by women. Among the more recent writers there has been no more devoted smoker than Mr. Lowell, as his recently published letters testify. 3 of the most delightful poems in praise of smoking are his, and with Mr. Aldrich's charming Latakia are the gems of the collection. The compiler desires to express his grateful acknowledgments to friends who have permitted him to use their work, and have otherwise aided him from time to time, and to the many unknown authors whose poems are here gathered, and whom it was quite impossible to reach, and to Messrs. Houghton, Mifflin and Company, Harper and Brothers, the Bow and Merrill Company, and the publishers of Outlook for their gracious permission to include copyrighted poems. Signed J.K., Boston, July, 1894. And then begins the table of contents. My purpose with this channel is to read through this book, poem by poem. Each poem will be a video entry, and like I said before, will always be accompanied by a pipe. And to enjoy the sound of the language, the content of the poetry, and, quite frankly, the flavor and the aroma and the experience of the pipe. I hope you'll join me.